Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you to the Queensland Conservatorium Research Centre for inviting me to do this. And I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we're gathered today and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. So basically, I'm going to talk through a series of projects today that basically track almost a decade of practice working in the field of acoustic ecology. And a lot of my work has been based around climate change, looking at new ways that we can inspire global communities to engage in climate action and really respond to the critical issues that we're facing today. I'm sure many of you saw the IPCC report released just a couple of weeks ago. It's pretty clear that we're in a very dire situation, and I don't want to go into the details of climate change today because it's become very evident that talking about these facts doesn't actually work. So we're really seeing scientists now grapple with new ways to communicate climate change. And the polar bear has become a little bit of a poster child for climate change communication. And it's been interesting to see some of these conversations around polar bears recently. Some people saying, polar bears are really great to evoke empathy for climate change, to really connect with these issues. And then some other science communicators saying, well, humans can't actually relate to polar bears or what's happening in the Arctic, so maybe they're not the best way. But it's pretty clear we rapidly need new tools to understand these deeply ingrained issues that we're facing. And so all of my work has really been based around using interdisciplinary creativity with a core focus on music and sound to immerse people in the changing soundscapes of ecosystems and really understand some of the ecosystems we don't think about. So traditionally, I work with immersive sound, so immersive live performances, where the speakers are surrounding the audience and can immerse you in these different environments, from the floor of the ocean to the canopy of the Amazon rainforest. And in addition to live performances, I work a lot in immersive installations, so continuous soundscapes that respond and track different ecosystems, running sometimes for 24 hours or 48 hours, and again immersing people in these ecosystems. And over the last decade, I've spent a lot of time looking at ways we can use mobile technologies, so creating augmented reality sound walks, where sounds are GPS located and your phone works in the same way as Google Maps to really trigger these soundscapes where the listener becomes the composer in mapping these different soundscapes in an environment. So I'm going to talk about a few of those today, but I just wanted to give some background and some context to this work. First of all, so I grew up on the Murray River in South Australia and spent a lot of time on the Great Barrier Reef, so it was kind of inevitable that these pretty iconic ecosystems would have a big influence on my creative practice. And all the work that I'm doing is very embedded in communities, looking at this idea of inspiring communities to explore new ways to really listen to the environment. So I look at it at the moment as interdisciplinary creative projects that are embedded in communities that can explore the artistic and the scientific possibilities of listening to ecosystems. And much of this work was triggered through the initial stages of my PhD, where I looked at ways as a composer I could explore a method of my work, my compositions, having more impact in communities. So throughout my PhD, particularly in 2009, I developed this framework which looks quite simple when it's compressed onto a slide like that. But this idea has really underpinned a lot of my practice over the last decade. So having a really clear ecological context to the work that I'm doing, making sure that it's embedded and collaborative and developed with these long-term strategies with communities, highly interdisciplinary, working in partnership with a lot of organisations, and focusing on multi-platform outcomes as opposed to just one composition, looking at work that's disseminated online in these immersive performances or the augmented reality installations. And so it's really, well, it was really looking at this idea of a creative project that's kind of inspired by an environment and embedded in a community, and looks at all of these ways that that process, the compositions, the creative outcomes, can be a catalyst for different education platforms, developing partnerships, and ultimately policy change when we're talking about the environmental crisis we're in. And so all of this work is based around field recordings from the environment, and this whole focus of the session today is really around aquatic ecosystems. So most of my work has been inspired in many ways by the sounds beneath the surface of the water, and a tool that has been essential to my practice for the last 15 years now is hydrophones, underwater microphones that allow us to record the sounds beneath the surface. Now, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the sounds of humpback whales, for example, or dolphins, but a lot of people don't really register the sound of river systems. And I've been constantly fascinated since the day I had a hydrophone of the sounds beneath the surface of rivers. And what struck me initially was how different these soundscapes were. How I could put a hydrophone in a very polluted river in North India and hear this symphony of sound that in many cases I had no idea what these sounds actually were, or compare that with rivers flowing through major cities like Chicago and find these fascinating soundscapes beneath the surface. And I just want to give you a tiny example. So that was one of my really early hydrophone recordings that I used quite extensively in a touring installation called Sound Mirrors, which was looking at mapping the voice of global river systems. And what was really interesting while I was touring that project was often people would come up to me afterwards and say, you know, that sound, the kind of high-pitched clicking sound was really fascinating. What was it, and what does it kind of mean to the health of the environment? And I started to realize that although I knew what a lot of the sounds were, I just didn't know enough about the scientific possibilities of what I was listening to. And this really hit home in a big way in 2010 when I worked on an expansion of that project called the Dam Project on the Narmada River in North India. And this is a river that has been dammed, obviously, and has internally displaced over 20 million people. And I was invited there with a group of Australian and Indian artists to work directly with the community. We lived and worked with the community and create a work in response to this river system. And I was fascinated by the way the community spoke about this river system in sonic terms. You know, they talked about this idea that the dam had silenced the river, that it used to be a river filled with music. And I was struck by the moment I put my hydrophones in the river, it was basically silent. So that led me to work quite a lot with the community, recording stories in response to the river and working with local children who have written songs in response to the river. And I'm just going to let a little bit of this play.
These are all struggle songs, which means Zindabad is like a revolutionary, it's a gesture. They say Zindabad kare wo Adivasi, which means they're beckoning the Adivasi to get ready to struggle, get ready to fight. And then in each stanza it's about your land has been submerged, stand up and fight, your jungle has been submerged, stand up and fight, your gods and goddesses have been submerged, your insects have been submerged, such things. So you must stand up, you must wake up, you must fight.
So for me, it was really a true, I'll just turn that down a bit, it was really a true privilege to work with these activists along the Namada River. And before this project, you know, I called myself an environmental activist, and I haven't really called myself an activist since, because the remarkable ways that these communities are working directly with the river system to try and protect and conserve it was kind of mind-blowing. And the more time that passes, the more I realise how impactful this project really was on my practice. And it really transformed how I work as a composer, because I felt so much through this project that, you know, just composing music in response to this environment just wasn't enough. And I felt that if I was going to say that these compositions you know, could potentially have value in inspiring conservation, then I had to know a lot more about that environment and have a deeper understanding of what every single one of those sounds actually meant to those ecosystems. And it also made me think that, you know, sound could be this really powerful tool to give these communities agency in actually demonstrating what was happening in the river system. You know, we could immediately hear that silence beneath the surface was profound and it meant something. And when we look at, you know, the surface of a river system, we literally have no idea, you know, what's happening beneath the surface. So when we're looking at climate change, you know, these changes in terrestrial environments are very visible. You know, we can see the impact that happens when a cyclone or a flood takes out a whole lot of trees. We can hear those differences in insects and birds, but these dramatic changes that happen beneath the surface of freshwater and marine environments often are going unnoticed simply due to visibility. And many of the techniques that are still in use today by scientists, such as electrofishing or capture and release, really don't reflect reality, in the words of Simon Linke. These are very invasive techniques, and they don't give us reliable information about the health of these ecosystems. But we know that you can use hydrophones to actually listen to these species that we're trying to monitor. Just to give you a very quick example, this is a saltwater fish, a black drumfish. This is a spangled perch in a river in North Queensland. A catfish in the Brisbane River. And then also aquatic insects make a whole range of very identifiable sounds. So aquatic bioacoustics is this idea of, you know, focusing on these individual species that we can monitor through sound, which we know very clearly we can. But this idea of aquatic ecoacoustics, looking at the soundscape as an entire ecosystem and the relationship between these sounds, allows us to record and map these river systems in a new way. So this has led me to go back through this 10, almost 15-year database of river recordings and analyse these changes over time and explore those differences scientifically as well as artistically. To give you a very quick example, So these are all recordings that I've used as source material in my compositions, performances, and you can hear that each of those river systems has a very distinctive voice. So a voice that changes throughout the day, throughout the year, different seasons, and is full of information about the health of these ecosystems. And what's really exciting is hydrophones, these underwater microphones, are becoming increasingly accessible and affordable. These are non-invasive technologies, so we can literally drop them in the river and be not just connecting with the river system in a new way, but capturing this scientific data within the course of a couple of minutes. They're now very, very small and incredibly easy to use. And while hydrophones have been used in marine research for many, many years, they're traditionally very expensive, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars, up to $100,000, require a lot of specialists to manage them, and require quite a lot of money to get them out into these locations and recording soundscapes. So not necessarily the most cost-effective way, but what's even more exciting now is we can capture the exact same quality of acoustic data on a microcomputer. A Pi 0 here with a small sound card, we can capture the same quality of data in marine environments and freshwater environments, which just makes this so affordable and accessible for communities, which is what we've been doing, basically developing these kits that enable you to either stream or record the sounds beneath the surface. And of course, hydrophones are this really rich way to engage communities in their river system. And that was really the underpinning idea of the River Listening Project, which is in essence exploring the cultural and biological diversity of global river systems. So it's not changing what I'm doing as a composer. I'm still recording these environments and creating work in response to them, but that work is embedded in communities and is facilitated through workshops, river listening labs, and different experiences where community members can engage with the soundscapes of this river system. This has happened in all different parts of the world. The Thames, which you heard in that example earlier with two of my main collaborators there, Simon Linky and Toby Gifford. We've done scientific monitoring on projects throughout China, mapped the changing soundscapes of frozen rivers through Norway and looked at how ice really affected those soundscapes, to back here in Australia with a whole range of rivers throughout Queensland and different parts of Australia. And this image was one of my favourite river listening images initially. This is Marilyn O'Connell, who's from the Mary River, and she's one of the world's leading specialists of the Mary River turtle. And she knows this river so well. You know, she knows where the turtles hang out, she knows exactly where the best rocks are to do different kinds of monitoring, and she was a little bit skeptical when these artists and scientists from Griffith University wanted to come and listen to the river. She sort of said, oh yeah, all right, sure, I'll take you to listen to the river. She didn't really know what a hydrophone was or what it could do, but this was the first moment that she put headphones on and started listening beneath the surface. And she was completely enthralled. She didn't move for a good 15 minutes and she didn't want to take the headphones off. And she realized there was this entire element of not just her research, but of her understanding of this river that she was so passionate about, this entire element that was missing. And this was a turning point for her as well. She began to really explore the value of sound in the way that she was connecting to the river system, but also in her research. And this triggered a whole spectrum of projects. One that is monitoring the hatching of the endangered Mary River turtles through sound, which we've been working on for the last few years, and a range of ways that we've been working with the Mary River community there. So that idea of working directly in partnership with communities and with local governments has been really fundamental to the River Listening Project. But, you know, not always easy either, because it is quite new research in a way, and I can remember, you know, very early on in this project, probably around 2012, trying to convince local government to explore this idea of biodiversity monitoring through sound. And I remember the conservation manager kind of saying, oh, you know, that artist is back in here with her hydrophones again and wants to put them in the river. And the manager came out to me and kind of said, look, you know, if you can show us a peer-reviewed scientific paper that's saying fish are talking to each other, and we can use that to understand the health of the river, then we'll talk about putting hydrophones in the river and giving you some money to do it. And I kind of thought, right, all right, that sounds like a good plan. And so, you know, over the last few years, we've invested just as much time in really solidifying the science as I have been working on developing these creative outputs that are now so informed and embedded in the science. And it's been a privilege to work with people like Simon Linky here at Griffith University, who had never touched a hydrophone before this project, but is now one of the world's leading specialists in freshwater ecoacoustics. This paper, published in Frontiers in Ecology, does demonstrate that fish are talking to each other in river systems, and we can use that to understand the health of the environment. And this paper has been a catalyst for a whole range of projects and attracted a lot of attention through different forms as well. And I just want to play you a little.
Queensland researchers are diving deep into the world of talking fish. They're tuning into their underwater conversations with special microphones and using it to gain an understanding of the river's health.
If you listen carefully, you can hear these fish nattering away. And while it may sound like a measly grunt, there's some rather remarkable reasons for their chatter.
The first one is to warn each other of danger. The second one is to scare each other away. And the third one is to look for love.
Around 800 species are known to talk, so now researchers are eavesdropping. They're casting hydrophones into creeks and rivers across Australia to better understand where certain fish exist and how many there are.
So you can look how many sooty grunters are in your river in a totally non-invasive way.
It's not just fish shooting the breeze on the riverbed.
The rocks that run around in rivers and insects that talk to each other, that all makes noise.
And scientists are now trying to use a combination of these tunes to judge a waterway's purity.
Basically, I'm determining whether the heartbeat or the sounds that I'm listening to in rivers are healthy or not.
Researchers say they can use the underwater language not only for conservation, but to gauge how well a river is recovering following disturbances like floods and chemical spills.
There are already recorders out there that can record over the time of 1 year, so you can see the difference in a river, in a creek, in the term.
Telltale signs straight from the fish's mouth. Tristan Vorius, 7 News.
So you also saw Amelia there, one of our PhD students, also at the Australian Rivers Institute. And so this has been a catalyst for a lot of students to engage across both sciences and arts, and not just PhD and master's students, but we've been running workshops here at the Conservatorium, of course. These are some of our music technology students recording the sounds of the Brisbane River before World Science Festival last year, where they used those soundscapes as part of installations that were in the Sonic Playground in the foyer, and also as sound material in augmented reality sound walks throughout South Bank. So it's not just recording these ecosystems, but really understanding the technology behind it. And these hydrophones, you know, are also really easy to make. This is an example by Jezraeli French in the UK, which is essentially just a contact microphone that's in a bottle top and waterproofed naturally, which gets a very good quality sound. And they're so easy to make that we've been making hydrophones with children as well. These are 10-year-old girls in the Noosa Biosphere Reserve who are making their own hydrophones and then spending the afternoon recording the changing soundscapes of the river system. And I'm always, you know, so I guess so happy to see how students, especially young children, engage with the sounds beneath the surface. And so as part of all of this unfolding of the River Listening Project in different parts of the world, I've made a point to always run workshops with kids. And during the Sound and Environments Conference in the University of Hull last year as part of the UK City of Culture, we ran workshops with kids throughout Hull, and it was freezing cold and raining, and I thought none of them would come, but they were so excited to be listening to the sounds beneath the surface. And what really struck me with some of these workshops is all these kids thought it was completely normal. They were engaged in this sort of highly interdisciplinary process. They didn't really care whether it was art or whether it was science. They were just enthralled by these sounds beneath the surface, to the point that a lot of these kids wanted to go home with hydrophones, and a couple of them actually asked me which shop you could buy hydrophones from and wanted one for Christmas. So for me, you know, research-wise and creative-wise, that's the best possible outcome, to really see that level of engagement through children. So naturally, there is an endless database of sound with this material. It's impossible for me to use all of this in my compositions, and I've been looking at ways to create these sound maps and databases that make these sounds a lot more accessible. So naturally, sound maps have been a really key tool in this, and with these we've been exploring ways to layer this scientific material used for biodiversity monitoring with creative responses. So creative responses from the community are embedded in these sound maps, in addition to my compositions, of course. And there's really just terabytes and terabytes of material now. Too much material that I could ever listen to in my lifetime. I worked out that it would take something like 72 years to listen to all the material we've recorded. So I've also been working in collaboration with scientists to explore ways that we can really draw on creative ideas to analyse this material. And if we look at different visualisation tools, if I open one of these 24-hour recordings as a spectrogram or a sonogram or just a waveform, you know, in normal software it doesn't really tell us much information. I don't know about you, but that basically tells me nothing about the sound file. But once we start exploring different visualization tools and using acoustic indices, so algorithms mapped over those sounds, we're able to see these patterns and changes. And what's really exciting is when you bring artists and scientists together in this process, different ways of listening and different ways of recognizing these patterns becomes, you know, quite profound from both artistic and scientific purposes. So this is a 48-hour recording, a river recording, which allowed us to reveal that these patterns in changes in aquatic insects were influenced by lunar patterns, which makes perfect sense, right? But of course, very limited research in this area. And this technique is primarily developed by Michael Towsey, an incredible scientist who's actually based at QUT. So he's developed this Falsecolor spectrogram technique that allows you to map these patterns over large amounts of data. And if we take a closer look at one of these, the one in the corner, which is 44 days of continuous ocean recordings, and this is 15 kilometres off the coast of Georgia in breeding grounds for North Atlantic right whales. And what's quite fascinating about this example is these hydrophone recordings and the research that was surrounding them was kind of suggesting that ships probably don't have an impact on this sonic environment. But when we look at this, what we're seeing, these 44 days of continuous recording, 24-hour recordings, these ribbons of sound, the mapping of them, the green material you can see is those chorus of the black drumfish, the fish you heard earlier, and those red bumps throughout the landscape are passing ships. So just by looking at this image, we immediately know that that anthropogenic noise, the sound of passing ships, is having a pretty significant impact in this area. And what I find really powerful about this image as well is it's incredibly accessible. I use this often in the context of workshops with young children, and they immediately know what's happening in this image. You know, they're immediately saying things like, well, you know, if this is a breeding ground and there's baby whales there, the baby whales wouldn't be able to hear their mum if there's a big ship going past. So I think the way that Michael's exploring this data and ways to visualise it has all of these exciting possibilities across interdisciplinary research. I've been composing work in response to a lot of his spectrograms, using them as scores. We've also created these collaborative installations where we're responding to each other's work and looking at those true interdisciplinary possibilities of interpreting data. And we actually had one of these papers published just last night, in perfect timing for this presentation, which was in an interdisciplinary journal where they actually allowed me to publish a soundscape as a response. So the soundscape essentially counted as 2 pages of text in this journal article, and we responded to each other's work to really look at ways that we can interpret this data through artistic and scientific possibilities. Naturally, this idea of responding to work like that in immersive performances is my true passion when it comes to this kind of work. But I'm so aware that it's not always accessible to encourage people to come to these immersive performances, which is why I have invested so much time in really exploring the possibilities of mobile technologies. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about this for a moment. And I've been struck just by different ways that people working in the conservation space are looking at the possibilities of mobile technologies. I often see this image. It was particularly prevalent at the World Parks Congress in 2014, where a lot of researchers were saying, you know, in order to really ignite climate action in young people and re-engage youth in the environment, we need to disconnect them from technology. So there are a lot of people suggesting this idea that, you know, throwing young people into the wilderness without their phones is a very effective way to reconnect them with the environment. I'm sure that works very well in some contexts, but I think it's probably challenging to suggest that's going to work in a lot of contexts as well. So I've really been looking at ways to, rather than look at mobile technologies as tools for disconnection, really looking at them as tools for reconnection. You know, how can we use mobile phones to encourage young people in particular, but communities more broadly, to connect with these changing ecosystems in new ways? So the river listening sound walks are always geolocated along a river system, so it encourages you to walk towards that river system and engage with it. Listen to the sounds beneath the surface. They have live hydrophones and they map those soundscapes in real time with creative responses to the river system and all of that material that we're using to understand the health of the river. And what I also love about these augmented reality installations is, you know, we can actually take these to people, take them anywhere in the world. It might be challenging to get our Minister for Science to come to a concert at the conservatorium, but, you know, I can take this installation to her, put these headphones on her, and she can be listening to the changing soundscapes of the Great Barrier Reef or catfish in the Brisbane River. And this was at World Science Festival last year, where she was clearly quite curious as to the soundscapes beneath the surface. So this has also been quite effective in the context of major climate change events. For Climate Week New York in 2015, I basically took a map of the Amazon rainforest with a particular focus around the Amazon River, with the recordings that I've done over several years, and mapped those to the sensory intensity of Times Square. So it meant that those Amazon River dolphins you heard earlier were kind of hidden throughout different parts of Times Square, and you were able to walk through this intense environment and be immersed in the changing soundscapes of the Amazon. For COP21 in Paris, we did a range of projects, including the Seine River. And what was really exciting about this one is it was updating in real time with voices from local communities, but voices from decision makers who were talking about these very environments during COP. And it also meant that we had the voices of water protectors through this installation. So Indigenous communities in different parts of the world that I've been collaborating with who were unable to attend COP had their voices located around these conversations with decision makers. And naturally, this was all embedded in the changing soundscapes of global river systems. So this idea of really pushing what's possible with mobile technologies has been really integral in, I guess, propelling aspects of my creative practice and thinking about sound in environments in new ways. So I've been involved in the development of a lot of apps and also developed my own apps. And a lot of this was triggered through a QCRC project that I was involved with in 2008, Sonic Babylon, developed by the late William Duckworth and Nora Farrell. And this was a really pioneering project that looked at ways to use mobile technologies to basically plant these gardens of sound. It was way ahead of its time, and it's been quite inspirational in how I think about developing these apps. And last year, I launched a new app called Aurality, which was launched as part of the Queensland Music Festival, and it basically had a focus on these changing soundscapes of marine and freshwater environments, but mapped this with different ecosystems throughout Queensland. The soundscapes of ecosystems we might find more accessible, such as different rainforests, the dawn chorus, and it allowed people in multiple communities to connect with these sounds in different ways. So this basically mapped the entire coastline of Queensland, so connecting the coastline of Queensland through sound, and this involved live streams with hydrophones naturally, and a whole range of different workshops. And the next iteration of this app is basically an app that allows you to record with a hydrophone directly into your phone. So it means that in addition to engaging and interacting with these soundscapes, essentially composing your own piece as you walk throughout the environment, you're able to put a very accessible and affordable hydrophone straight into the water and record your own soundscape. That soundscape goes straight to the database and is of course used to understand the health of the river system, but really gives communities agency in having this simple technology, something that's probably in their back pocket anyway, to understand what's happening beneath the surface of the river. And not just rivers, of course, but other aquatic ecosystems too. And I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but I do just want to mention briefly the Sonic Reef project, which is a sister project to River Listing. It's designed in a very similar way and has a very similar intention, but is naturally focused on the changing soundscapes of the Great Barrier Reef as opposed to freshwater ecosystems. Now I just want to play you a quick example of the reef. So I don't think that example really needs any explanation, but I guess it's quite interesting when we think about, you know, the narrative that we're often fed around the Great Barrier Reef, and so much of that is based around these visual images of what a healthy reef looks like and what a dead reef looks like, when it's quite profound to really listen to those changes in sound. Obviously, it immediately evokes the sense of what's happening to the reef, but that data is also really powerful in understanding the health of these changing ecosystems and acting quite quickly. These live hydrophones can tell us when these changes are happening and how quickly they're happening as well. And as depressing as that particular example is, you know, the idea of this technology being so uninvasive, and accessible means that new discoveries are being made literally every month at the moment. I don't want to play too many, but I'll just give one very quick example. I thought this one was apt. You know, a new snapping shrimp that was discovered with hydrophones just last year, named after Pink Floyd. I'll play a tiny example of that. Now, snapping shrimps often get a bad rap with a lot of the scientists I'm working with, especially scientists specialising in marine environments, because they're often trying to monitor cetaceans, whales, dolphins, so snapping shrimp are quite inconvenient in the soundscape. But they're quite fascinating to really listen to how these, the complexity of snapping shrimp soundscapes changes over time, and again can give us all this rich information about the health of the environment. So the most recent example of one of these projects really coming together, connecting this freshwater work with all the work I've been doing in marine environments as well, is a creative work called Listening Underwater. And this was realised in two ways. It was developed for Horizon Festival, which was just a month or so ago on the Sunshine Coast. And this was an augmented reality sound walk that allowed you to walk along the coastline of Queensland and listen to the changing soundscapes of freshwater and marine environments. Now, the new development with this particular piece is the sounds were updated every day. So they evolved throughout the experience, and they were updated in response to real-time data. And I developed a new way to really try and connect the community to this environment, which meant that the sounds, so this track of sounds, this is an example of one of them there, this track of sounds updated with tidal data. So there was a line of sound that was essentially moving with the tides. So this meant if you wanted to, you could take your shoes off and actually put your feet in the water and listen to these sounds that were essentially triggered by the tides. So this really provided the community with a different way to connect with this ecosystem. Yes, they could sit up on the boardwalk and listen, or walk along the boardwalk and listen, but I was really excited by the ideas that they had to put their feet in the water and actually connect with this water to listen to these soundscapes. So this included a whole range of material, and we had live hydrophones in the water, so we were live streaming storms and passing humpback whales, and changing and evolving every day. And it had a lot of collaborations with the local community, particularly Lyndon Davis, an emerging Gubbi Gubbi elder who I've worked with for almost 10 years now, whose voice was basically weaved throughout these soundscapes, responding to some of the recordings. I'll play you a tiny example with Lyndon talking about a dolphin recording we did just off the coast there.
Used the vibrations of a spear tap on the water to call out to a dolphin, to signal a dolphin to come and help us catch some mullet. We're using some Morse code, and this dolphin, he can hear all these other sounds going on in the ocean, but then he hears this tap on the shore, and he's oh, that's my Earth brothers there. I better go and help them two-leg fellas out. You know what I mean? And that I find that story amazing, that our families used to communicate on that type of level, and they were in unison with the call, and they knew the call, and they knew exactly what the call was for, and so they started to scare the fish back towards where the call was coming from. And then after the hunt, the catch was shared with the dolphins, and made sure a portion of it was given back to them, hand feeding them just like you do now, but having that real strong connection with them, and almost like talking to you, and when you're a family, they're a family out there in the water. And
so all of the sounds that were in the augmented reality sound walks were also integrated into a live performance. So I took about 2 hours of this material and mixed it all live in surround sound, and we built a custom venue on the beach in Mooloolaba, a geodesic dome that allowed us to immerse people in these soundscapes and have live hydrophones in the water. I don't recommend building a geodesic dome in 40-knot winds, but anyway. And it was a really exciting way to connect people with these soundscapes. So I also used a lot of projections in this piece as a prelude to really immerse people in these ecosystems, and then it went to acoustic, so black performance. I'll play a couple of very quick examples. So they were humpbacks recorded just off the Fraser coast. And I might skip that one. And so everyone that was, as part of these performances and augmented reality installations, got a lot of information about the health of Sunshine Coast aquatic environments, and was given ways that they could connect to different conservation efforts as well, because all of these projects are really underpinned by conservation, of course. So it's critical for me to make those connections, and naturally also critical that these were accessible for young people. Engaging young people in these projects, as I mentioned earlier, is always really important for me. As the generation that will experience the true ramifications of climate change, I really believe that if we can give young people the tools to engage with their environment in new ways and agency to use this technology, then we really have hope for the future. And I'm always inspired by how engaged young people are in these changing ecosystems as well. And I just wanted to close by saying that we obviously have a lot of humpback whales going up and down the coast of Queensland at the moment. They're gradually leaving and making their way back to Antarctica, but there's still a number of them around, and we'll be doing another live stream tomorrow morning, which is part of a Griffith University project called Whales in a Changing Climate, which I'm basically using sound to map the changing migration patterns of humpback whales. So in these particular experiences, we're essentially putting live hydrophones in the water. You can follow that hashtag there, listening underwater, ideally on Twitter. That's the easiest way to access it, but any social media platform will get you there. Or follow me on Twitter, and you can click on that between 7:30 and 9:30 tomorrow morning and hopefully listen to humpback whales if they're still around. We've definitely sighted a few today, so I'm sure we'll have at least one singing in the morning. So I thought that would be a nice way just to close with the idea of encouraging you to connect with this changing soundscape that we have quite literally on our doorstep. Thank you.